How's it going, guys? I am Connor from Running Warehouse, and we did not get canceled last week, so we are back at it with episode 2 of the Running Warehouse Connection, our new weekly show where we bring the running community together to talk about anything and everything running related. This week's guest, we've got a heavy hitter. He's an Olympian. He's a professor. He's a coach, and he's a father. We have Jared Ward. Jared, thanks for joining up with us today.
Hey, dude, Connor, thanks for having me on. It's good to see you again, even virtually. This feels good right now.
It's good to see you as well. And, things have changed a lot since we talked last time back in December. At that time, you were training hard, getting ready for the Olympic trials, and now we're all at our houses quarantined. So I guess the first question I have for you today is, how are you doing? Are you still training, or have focuses shifted a little bit?
I'm doing well. It took me a few weeks emotionally to get over the Olympic trials, and so home time with my family wasn't necessarily a bad way to kick that. And I certainly had a full racing schedule for the spring that's been leveled, but this has still been a fun opportunity to kind of hit the reset button and look towards what hopefully is a good fall and a good fall racing schedule and get healthy. I was treating some pain on the ball of my foot for a few weeks going into the trials, and I don't think it affected training or performance at the trials, but this was a great time to go ahead and give myself some rest to nip that injury. And so I've been spending time on my exercise bike. I got a barbell rack set up in my basement a few weeks ago that I'd bought like a year ago. So plenty of time at home to sort things out. And so I'm using that time. I'm lifting and biking and waiting on my foot to heal and doing some yard work. So it's been good. It really has been good time.
Good. It's good to hear training is still going. You're still staying fit and you're working out those little kinks. Now, for someone who maybe isn't very well versed in what it takes to be an elite marathoner, what does a normal weekly mileage build-up look like? And then when you're in peak season, what's the highest mileage you're going to get to?
Well, my volume is probably somewhere between 90 and 110 miles week in, week out through the year. During peak marathon training, sometimes it pushes just a little north of 110. The real thing that changed during marathon training is that long runs become more intense. Workout volume becomes a little bit bigger. And so I need the recovery time in between. And so it's not that necessarily in-season mileage is that much higher than out of season mileage. I mean, it's a little bit higher, but mostly it's intensity in the season that amps up. And I think opportunities like this, where there's no races on the schedule, there's no pressure to be ready for anything in the coming weeks or even the coming months, allows everybody to be a little bit more patient. And I think there's a lot of running maturity in runners that have learned how to be patient, and that maturity translates to good performances in the long run. And so taking advantage of continuing to train, continuing to stay at some level of fitness, even though we're maybe not sharpening a lot or we're not racing, I think can still pay good long-term dividends. And if we can take advantage of this time right now to do that and to stay healthy, and for some of us get healthy, then we can still be productive with our time.
Yeah, I think we're kind of in a weird spot right now where there is no immediate race plans in the future. There's always that next thing. So it is kind of cool to take a step back and just think about, okay, let's look long-term right now. So that's cool. Now, moving on to, you talked about 110, 120 mile weeks. That's a lot of mileage for just a normal person, even for like a month. That's a lot of miles. You didn't just get there overnight. How did you get from, let's say, high school to where you are today? What did the training changes look like over that time period?
Well, it's little changes every year. And I think, in high school, I went from at the start of high school running 20 miles a week to at the end of high school running 40 or 45 miles a week. And that was a lot. I was running 45 miles a week and still cross training because of shin splints somewhat regularly. You know, I'd get up to peak mileage for a few weeks, and then my shins would start bugging me, and I'd bring it back down. And even through college, my shins were kind of they were my gauge on, am I pushing enough or too much, or, you know, where I am on this. So if the shins don't hurt at all, I'm probably not pushing enough, but if they hurt too much, then I'm pushing too much. Right. And so I was just trying to strike this balance. And it's funny how it just is, you can, you know, it just happens gradually. You can add a little bit season to season, but probably not more than 5 miles ish a season into overall like lifetime volume. So you know, when I coach for Team Endure Strong, and I'll tell my athletes on there, I think probably a couple of times a year at the end of a season, when we go into the next season, if you've been healthy this past season, you can add 5 miles a week to what you're going to do next season. And that's really how it was for me through college. My freshman year, I was running 55 miles a week. My sophomore year cross country, I was running like 65 miles a week. My sophomore year track was getting up to like 70. And, you know, it's just kind of every season you just add a little bit. And if you can stay healthy and stay consistent with your volume, then your body builds up some resilience. If you gamble too much and you try to add too much volume and you find yourself injured, and especially if you find yourself in a pattern of gambling and then injury, then you don't build up as much of that long-term resilience, and you kind of set your own ceiling. So I think the body's an amazing thing. If you can learn how to take care of your own body, then it's going to adjust for you and continue to allow you to push it just a little bit more.
Yeah, when we talk about pushing and the body adapting, there's another part of the puzzle with you. We've got altitude, because you're training in Provo, Utah. How has that played an impact on just your overall mileage, intensity? Is that something that you've always had, or was that altitude not really an impact till you got into college?
You know, because I was born here in Utah at 4,500 feet, and I've essentially lived and trained at 4,500 feet, I don't know any different. You know, and there's some things, there's some lung surface area that relates to altitude born runners. And so there is something, some aspect to the discussion on, hey, does it make a difference to be born and raised at altitude? But for the most part, I think it's training and it's the body adjusting. And you know, to me, it manifests how amazing the human body is, that someone can move to train at altitude and the body adjusts within like 3 weeks, right? That's amazing. and when you move back down to sea level, so here's the thing, on altitude training, you move to altitude, your body stimulates, it releases naturally EPO, right? So this is healthy, this is your body releasing EPO. This is different than doping, right? So your body releases it and it stimulates red blood cell growth, and you grow more red blood cells. And those red blood cells help you transport more oxygen. And that happens in like 2-3 weeks. They say if you go 4 weeks, train at altitude, you get that benefit. Now, here's another amazing thing. You know, the reason that taking that blood doping and EPO is dangerous is that if you get so much in your body, then you strain your heart, and you need it at altitude. But then when you come back down to sea level, the half-life of red blood cells is like 180 days. Okay. So your body makes a red blood cell. It lasts for like 180 days. When you go make more red blood cells at altitude and then you come down to sea level, your body destroys the extra red blood cells within 30 days, which is also amazing, right? Because your body's like, oh, we don't need these anymore. It's straining our heart. It's not healthy for us. We're going to get rid of them. And that's why distance runners are this science-y, or endurance athletes in general, boxers, bikers, everything, is you have to go train at altitude, but then there's a timing of when you come down and race, because your body says, hey, we don't need this for life. We're going to get rid of it. I mean, it blows my mind that our bodies are so amazing in terms of how quickly we adapt and how quickly we back adapt. And I think recognizing that, you know, that's just one example of altitude training, that our bodies are similar in a lot of other ways. And as we demand something of our body, it's going to adapt. But if we demand too much, think for the cheaters out there that are blood doping and using EPO and stuff, you demand too much, you put your body at risk of dying, of breaking, right? And so we're just got to try to strike the balance in training of giving our body just enough stress that our body can adapt to it and that we can continue to get better. And consistency is a big part of that, and patience is a big part of that.
Yeah, and when you talk about these athletes that are going out and training at altitude for a certain amount of time and then going back to race, how does that impact you since you are at altitude pretty much year round? Are you planning races in according? Are you getting there early? What is the whole thought process come race day for, let's say, the Olympic trials?
So for the Olympic trials, I just trained at home. Sometimes I'll move a little bit higher elevation. The optimal training is 7,000 to 8,000 feet is what science says is optimal for stimulating red blood cell growth while still giving your body the time to recover. The drawback to training at altitude is that it takes your body longer to recover. And so you get down to sea level and you start recovering quicker. So there's a timing science that says, hey, you should come down from altitude and race within 72 hours. And then for some reason, they don't know why, there's this blackout period where you shouldn't race for between 3 and 17 days of when you come down from altitude. Okay. And that's research that Dr. Chapman with USATF has pushed out and has looked at, and some of the stuff they've done with athletes. And they have theories why there's this blackout time, and it's probably something to do with the body adjusting and getting rid of those extra red blood cells or something. But so there is a timing to it. Now, because I didn't go to higher elevation to train for the trials, I wasn't real concerned about the timing, but I definitely thought, hey, I'm going from Utah to Atlanta. I'm going to land in Atlanta less than 72 hours before racing. So it's going to be a good thing. Now, sometimes when I'm running Boston or New York or some of these marathons where they have a lot of they have press conferences and PR things, and they own the athlete for a few days. Sometimes I have to be there a little longer than 72 hours before, and it seems to work just fine when I race 4 days after coming down or 5 days after coming down. But according to the science, that's what they say. So I don't know. I'm one of those guys that I read all the science. I get excited about the science. And then my coach will say, Jared, you're really, really fit. Just run hard. You'll be fine. And I say, okay. And I try to forget about it and just run.
Yeah, it's funny how at the end of the day, the fitness is really what's going to do it. Sometimes we overthink things as runners, but you just got to trust the training you've put in.
I think that's true.
Yeah. So we were talking about the Olympic trials, and going into it, we talked right beforehand. You were fit. You were ready. You were one of my favorites. I had you in the top 3. I was watching you as the race was going on, and things just didn't pan out as were expected. Can you talk about, let's go before the race. What was the game plan going into the Olympic trials?
It really was just to be patient, to really just try to be patient. I thought that the course in Atlanta was tough enough that that the marathon was going to beat runners. And so I really didn't go into it with this mentality of I have to go out there and beat other runners. I just thought I have to go out there and not let the marathon beat me, and be patient through this course. And so I was surprised, when I felt great the morning of the race. I felt great during the warm up. The race started and I thought, oh, we're running much faster than I thought we'd be, but I felt okay. And I really, in the early miles of the race, I thought this is probably best case scenario. This pace is just going to wear everybody out, and I feel okay. And then it just ended up being me that the pace wore out. And so, it's tough. I don't really know what to make of the race when I think back on it. I mean, I pulled the plug at about mile 20 when I knew that there was no way I was going to finish in the top 3. And I had this little bit of this nagging foot pain, and I thought, well, I'm not going to do any more damage than, just to finish not in the top 3. And so I kind of pulled the plug and still wanted to finish. But I've thought back to that and thought, well, why did it play out like that? And honestly, I mean, it's hard to say because we only get one marathon for every marathon buildup. And so I can't say, oh, was it an off day? I don't know. I'm never going to get to run that race with the same buildup again. My hunch is maybe that I had a little bit of an off day, but I think that some guys just ran some amazing races. I mean, to run 2:10 on that course, but before the race, I was saying, well, when I was talking with Coach Eyestone, I said, hey, I think I'm in 207, 208 shape on a flat course. And I said, I think that translates to 210, 211 on this hilly Atlanta course. And so for those guys running, 210, and Galen running 209, I'm really, at least on the model that I had built out before the race, I was calling that 206, 207 marathon. That's amazing. And so, when I look at it that way, part of me just wants to say, hey, there were just a lot more guys that were really ready for that race than I thought there were going to be. And which is a good thing for American distance running, and it creates opportunities and means that in the future, when I'm racing those guys, if I finish ahead of them, then that means more to me because they're 207 marathoners. And so I don't know. I think in hindsight, I really and maybe it helps the sting too a little bit to think, hey, I ran okay. There were just some other guys that ran really, really well.
Yeah, and when we talk about stiff competition in this race, going into it prior, there was a couple guys that were under 210, including you. And then going into this race, about halfway through, there's just this massive pack that's all in 210 shape. How much did that surprise you? And was there any particular athlete where you're like, wow, I did not see that coming?
Well, we went through halfway and I was running right next to Tyler Pinnell, and Tyler Pinnell had fallen like the lap before right in front of me. I kind of jumped to the side, kind of over him. And then there were a few other guys that fell. And then he got right back up and got back in there. Right. And I'm running next to him, so it's amazing. He falls, he gets right back in it. We're still running 5 flat pace or whatever out there, average. And we went through halfway. And he said to me, this is nuts. We're going 211 flat pace and there's 30 guys in this pack. And I think that was a sentiment that a lot of us felt. I was so blindsided by the depth of that field. I mean, guys, there were just so many guys on a mission to make that team. I think I tend to kind of be a realist when it comes to statistics and odds and things like that, or at least I think I am, right? Maybe we all think we're realists, but at least I think I am. And so when I was looking at, hey, who can make the team, my list wasn't real long for anyone that had like a greater than 30 or 40% chance of making the team. Right. And then it was a pretty long list for someone who had, this person has a 4% chance and this person has a 3% chance and whatever. But I think, in hindsight, if I went back and put odds on that race, I'm going to have to hand out, somewhere between 15 and 40% chance of making that team to a lot of people. And I think I was just blindsided by how many people were really ready for that race and were on a mission to make that Olympic team.
Yeah. And that's interesting to hear you talk about the statistics of it all. I know you have a master's degree in statistics. How much does that play into your pre-race thoughts? Like, how much are you thinking about your competitors, the race course? How much does statistics play a part?
Well, I think whether I want it to or not, it definitely plays a part in how I break apart things and how I make a race plan, right? So if I'm looking at a race like this one, where I was really eyeing, a handful of guys more than a pack of guys, then I'm not thinking as much about what the pack means early on, and I'm more keying off of what these few guys are doing, and I'm not as concerned about pace unless it's relative to what these other guys that I'm watching are doing. And so it definitely keys, it plays a role in planning, but hopefully once the gun goes off, the best case scenario is that the statistics and the odds and the thinking and deliberating has made its way into the training and the preparation and the planning. But then when the gun goes off, it's athlete mind time, and it's just time to compete and to not overthink things. And I probably fell a little bit trapped to that in the trials of still analyzing what was going on through the race instead of just flipping the athlete switch and saying, okay, it's time to forget about everything else and just compete. So in a perfect world, I think the statistics does play a role. And I've been grateful for some of the feedback that my master's thesis gave me in pacing profiles and pace strategy. And I've been grateful for some of the data that the data-driven research that we've looked at in terms of nutrition and training and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, just being an athlete is what gets you to the finish line where you want to be. So I not to discredit the statistics, I think that there's a role that all of that plays. But once the gun goes off, it's time to race.
Yeah. And on race day at the trials, we talked about the carnage, and you said Tyler Pennell, he went down. Tyler wasn't the only runner to go down. Yeah. Several runners were going down in that course. And that happens when there's a lot of people, big packs, but also wind. It was a windy, hilly course. What were your thoughts on that course? Like, when I watched it on TV, it looked brutal, but being there as a runner, it had to have been 10 times worse than what us as spectators see on TV.
Yeah, it's surreal. It's just, it feels almost like you're running in a dream when you're running in a pack that big and there's so many bodies and the bodies are moving around. Like it doesn't feel, when you get out on a long run or even in a marathon, especially one where you're kind of running by yourself, you get into your zone, you get into your rhythm. You're feeling what your body is feeling, and you're feeling the rhythm and you're assessing. And in this race, there was just no time or place for rhythm. Like, we're trying to stay on our feet. And so we're not thinking about, hey, am I running relaxed, or, am I fueling enough? It's like, hey, am I surviving? And am I close enough to the front of this pack that if Galen Rupp takes off, I can get up to the front, in quicker than 2 minutes? Or, it's just, there's just so much. And so in some ways it distracts your mind, and an occupied mind sometimes in a marathon is a good thing to have a couple of things to focus on. But man, it sure derails a lot of the relax and be patient kind of plans, because you're just not thinking about that when you're thinking about survival. The trials felt more like the marathon in Rio in 2016 than any other race I've ever run. And it was just because, in Rio we were running 5-minute pace and there were 50 guys in that pack. And the roads were certainly wide. And I think that, it was more anticipated that we'd have these really big packs in the Olympics. Maybe less so than it was anticipated in Atlanta. But man, it just, and to have such a big pack. If we're running, 15 seconds per mile slower, then being in a big pack is just, it's less concerning. But we're going so fast that it feels like if you miss a beat, then, there's going to be separation there. It's going to be hard to make it up. And so to go that fast in a pack that big, it was, I don't think anyone would have written up the race like that. And it was an experience.
Yeah. And when you talk about staying in rhythm, it was hard because of all the moves being made. One of your fellow Saucony athletes, Brian Trader, made a very bold move early on in that race. What were you thinking when big moves like that are made, and does that affect your game plan at all, or are you sticking to your guns?
Well, I was thinking, go Brian. I was like, I hope I can see him for another 5 minutes, and then that I never see him again the rest of this race. And man, yeah, it was fun to see him out there. But no, I'm not a very emotional runner. I'm a more calculated in pacing, and I think my strength is just in my patience. And so that means sometimes that I'm not the one out there controlling the outcome, that I'm playing maybe a little bit safer. And so sometimes I wish that I was a little more assertive and less patient sometimes, but I think that's what has served me well, and what's put me in good positions. And I think, in 2016 in Rio, everyone, media was asking after the race, because there was a move and 3 separated, and then I was kind of in a lonely fourth. And after the race, everyone wanted to give me credit for having like known what was going to happen and running the right pace. I said, I had no idea what was going to happen. Like I didn't know if they were going to finish way up there and I was going to be fourth, or if I was like, all I knew was that I didn't think I could run much faster than I was running for the last 8 or 10 miles of that race. And so that's the pace I was going to run. And so when moves are made like that from a competitor's standpoint, I just think, well, if in this case, if Brian can run 440 miles for the rest of this marathon, he's going to win it, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so I try to not worry about it. But in the case of Brian specifically being up there, I was excited. It was a little bit empowering.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was also, when I saw him made that move, while in my head, I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be able to be done. I was also cheering, because you always want that underdog to pull through and take the win.
Right. That's how Meb wins Boston, right? So, you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the Olympic trials are over. We're going to move forward. Obviously, there's no races in the very near future, but let's look a year in advance. Are there any races that you'd like to set your eyes on now that the Olympic marathon isn't in the future?
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting, in any time we have an Olympic year where there's so much attention on one big race, it creates opportunities to do well in other races, right? It takes a shift away from other major marathons as people are keying up for Olympic marathons. This fall, we have now 5 major marathons in the fall, and that creates unique opportunities for a guy like me to have, it kind of sounds bad to say, hey, it's an opportunity because it's a diluted field, but there's 5 major marathons, and there are, assuming that COVID-19 is under control by the fall, there's going to be 5 major marathons that go off. And I want to be in one of them. And I want to be in whichever one that I have the best chance at finishing on the podium. And that's been a goal for a long time. And I'm okay. I'm okay if it's in a year when there were 5 major marathons in the fall. That doesn't bother me. And so it does. It creates opportunities that way. And I felt, after the result of the trials in Atlanta, it made me feel even more grateful for the opportunity that I had in Rio. And that was a life changer for me in terms of experience personally, but also in terms of exposure. And anytime there's an Olympic year, that drives attention around our sport for everybody. But for someone who's had the opportunity of being involved closely in the Olympics, it draws an extra, it carries extra weight. And so the opportunities, racing and speaking and sponsorship, all those things are amplified in Olympic years, whether or not I'm going to the Olympics or not. And so yeah, I'm grateful for the Olympic year and grateful for the opportunities that will bring, hopefully when it goes off next year, and also for the World Championships in Eugene 2020. I mean, that's another exciting opportunity to have the World Championships in America. And so I think whether or not, I have the chance to be on these teams, it's still good opportunities in the sport in general, but also creates opportunities for me in the sport and for Saucony in the sport and for some of the things that I get to be involved in with them. And so, yeah, it's just, it's all opportunity and it's all exposure. And typically any exposure, I'm of the mindset that any exposure is good exposure when we're talking about getting people interested in healthy lifestyle living, sustainable kind of sports. So
yeah. Now, after the Olympic trials ended, there was some word on the street that you hopped on a cruise with your family and went down to Mexico.
Yes.
What was the story behind that?
Well, in my defense, we signed up for the cruise before we were worried about COVID. But yeah, I had, and frankly, when we were getting on it, I had family and friends that were saying, "Are you crazy? You're getting on a cruise right now?" And I was like, "Oh man, COVID's over on the Diamond Princess in Asia. It's not here." And then halfway through that cruise, I was started to think, okay, please, I need to get off this ship. Just, I like, we had, I had all four of my kids there, and my parents were there, and my aunt and uncle were there to help take care of the kids. But I thought, man, if we're quarantined in a room for weeks and I have four kids, I have an interior room. There's not even a window in this room. Like, we're going to go nuts. And so yeah, halfway through, I think was when I really started taking this coronavirus pandemic seriously, and was ready to get off that ship and get home. But we had a good time. We saw a couple places in Mexico, and got some sun, and I ate way too much food, and we had a good time.
That's good to hear. I'm sure that was much needed after the big marathon build up for the trials. Now,
yeah, it was a good break.
I bet. So moving forward, we talked about the trials. That was one of what I was most interested to hear about. But a lot of our fans, they're shoe people. They want to hear about the latest and greatest running shoes. And some people might know, but not everyone. You are one of the main guys behind Saucony's big growth into the carbon fiber plate shoe world. You were the first guy to run in the Saucony Endorphin Pro, and you've been testing, you've been tweaking, improving the shoes. What was the whole testing process like for that shoe?
Man, it was like 18 months long, and we could talk about it for 8 hours. It was fun. The introduction, I mean, back in 2016, I had no idea that anyone else was wearing any kind of shoes that were different than just conventional shoes. I mean, I cared about the shoes that I was in, and wanted to make sure that my shoes were broken in and that I knew what I was running in, but I never knew what was on someone else's feet. I mean, it's almost crazy in this world that we're in now to think that 4 or 5 years ago that so many of us were like that. But that's the honest truth. I was like, 5 years ago, I had no idea what shoe anyone was wearing besides me. And that's totally different now, at least in the marathoning world and in this road running world, and maybe soon in the track world, shoes are becoming a big deal. And so I would say in 2017, I started to become aware of the shoes. In 2018, when BYU redid the study on the 4% shoes that Colorado had done, and I was a part of some of the analytics on that study, that was the first time that I started to respect that shoes might make a difference, like a sizable difference in performance. And it was only months after that, I was gearing up for the New York City Marathon. And in fact, I had pulled my hamstring in September before the New York Marathon. And so I was going to pull out, and David Monti encouraged me just to come and run anyways. He said, Jared, even if you only make it halfway, you should come try. And I was kind of like, well, okay, if you don't care if I only make it halfway, I'll come and run. Like, this will be fun. So I had some good training for a few weeks, but I really had kind of a spotty buildup. And then was it like a little over a week before the race, I got a call from Spencer White, who's the shoe developer at Saucony, and he just said, hey, we have a racing shoe if you'd be interested in wearing it for New York. And I said, this is like carbon fiber plated shoe? And he said, yeah. And I said, is it good? And he said, well, I think so. And I said, yeah, I'm interested. And so he sent me three different prototypes. So the first 3 prototypes, and they had different plates, different foams, just kind of 3 ideas of what he'd come up with so far and what the lab testing had said. And I got those shoes 5 days before the New York City Marathon. And I tried them on the treadmill, measuring oxygen uptake, and compared them with the Kinvara 9, which is the shoe I was going to race in. And 2 of these shoes responded very similar to the Kinvara, and then one of them was 4.4% better in terms of energy cost. Now, when something important to remember when we're hearing studies on what these shoes are doing in terms of performance, we really don't know what energy cost translates to in terms of a marathon time. So when I say 4.4% better, that means that my body is demanding 4.4% less oxygen. Now, we know that that's good. It's tough to say how good that is. Okay, unless we're going to start testing people running maximal effort marathons with VO2 machines hooked up to their faces for elite athletes, and that's going to be a tough sales pitch, getting any size sample size. So we don't know what this translates to, but we know it's better. And 4.4% lower energy costs is really good. So I said, well, I'm going to run in these shoes. I was like, this, David Monty said I only have to run half of this marathon anyways, and I got these new shoes. I'm going to try them out. And I loved them, and I ran well, and I think that I didn't really respect my lifetime fitness, and that 6 weeks of training kind of sharpened me up, but I think the shoes helped. And I was particularly sold on the downhill aspect of running, that with the extra cushioning, I didn't feel like I had to do as much work on the downhill. We caution runners to be careful on the downhill because you do more damage on the downhill. That eccentric loading really breaks apart muscles. And so we say, hey, even if you got a downhill marathon and you feel good, you got to be careful on the downhill. Well, I think being in some really high cushion shoes offsets some of that negative muscle breaking, eccentric motion stuff that's happening on the downhill. And so the shoes help. New shoes. I mean, I probably have 30 of these prototypes at home, and they send me a new block of shoes. I tell them the ones I'd like. We measure oxygen uptake. I was in a newer version of the shoe for Boston in 2019. In 2019. And then again, the final version of the shoe for New York in 2019. And so went through a lot of iterations of the shoe, and really it was me getting a shoe, running in them, measuring oxygen uptake for me, giving some feedback on how they felt, and asking questions. Doc, Ian Hunter, who is an exercise scientist, a biomechanist that I run the statistics on it. He does all the implementation and is really smart. And he and I went out to Boston and met with Saucony on these shoes partway through all of this, and asked a bunch of questions and explored some other options. And really, I think we got it down to a shoe that really has 3 components to helping performance. One of those components is the plate. I think the plate is a smaller aspect than most of media thinks it is, or the conventional. We talk about plated shoes. The plate does allow for some rigidity, and I think that helps in some ways. But I think the main thing a plate does is it facilitates part 2, which is the foam. With a carbon fiber plate, it allows developers to put such a low density foam in a shoe that without some sort of guidance, the shoe would just kind of fall. It would be so neutral, it would be hard for people to run in. So the plate allows us to have such low density foam, and we're finding low density foams that actually return a lot of energy. And that's one of the best things about the Saucony foam is I think this foam returns a lot of energy, and for a long time. The foam in the Saucony shoes, I think, is going to outlast the foam in a lot of the competitors' shoes. I think it's a pretty superior foam. And then the third aspect of the Saucony shoe is the shape. And I think that the team at Saucony really hit this out of the park. The shape of the shoe changes the posture of the runner. And what I've noticed in these Saucony shoes is it's hard to, I'm a hill striker. I'll probably always be a hill striker. And if you want to come to battle with me on 4-foot strike or heel strike, I'll battle you. I'll probably always be a heel striker, but I can't sit back quite as far in these shoes as I typically did in a racing shoe. The shape of it just kind of puts my hips a little bit more under me, puts me in a more assertive position, almost like a half marathon position. Now I'm still probably landing heel or at least midfoot strike, but it's the shoe that's forcing that change, not someone telling me to run differently. And I think the shape of the shoe is making a difference in performance too. And so those are, some of the things we learned and some of the things that I like about the Endorphin Pro that I'm running in.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear when you were testing the shoe, you're all masked up, checking VO2 levels. And I've done this before with a couple shoes testing myself. And it's interesting to see that these shoes between different versions are making a pretty critical impact on your performance depending on the runner and the shoe that you're using. And it's also interesting to see that from runner to runner, it can vary. So when you say what's best for you, it may not be what's best for everyone. And I know Molly Huddle decided not to wear the Endorphin Pro. So can you talk a little bit about how, maybe different gaits or just different people are going to be impacted by different shoes?
Yeah, and that's a hot topic in academic, certainly, research as it relates to running performance right now, is finding out why we have some responders and non-responders. Because another important thing for those interested in shoes and these things to understand is that we're reporting averages. So when Colorado says the shoe's 4% better, or when BYU redid the study on those Vaporflies, it was 2.7% better. Those are averages. And some people are more at like 6%, and some people are more at like 1%. We're not seeing people run worse, to my knowledge, but there's a huge range of responders, and we don't know why. But I'm assuming that as we explore, one of the studies that BYU just did recently was on carbon fiber plates, and they had different rigidity of plates, so thicker plates or thinner ones. And they were looking at, hey, can we tell based on someone's foot strike or based on some mechanics what type of stiffness of plate this runner prefers in terms of energy cost. But the bottom line is we don't know a lot yet. And I think that's research that's going to be big in the running industry over the next few years, is beginning to identify some of these things. And maybe we get to the point where you can come in or you can get online and say, hey, I need some new running shoes. This is some of information on how I run, or upload a video or something. And we can say, oh, this is the right shoe for you. It's going to make you 5% more. I don't know if we're going to get there or not, but I think we need to move more that direction if we're really aiming to level the playing field. And I know a lot of people sit on different sides of the fence in terms of whether they like the new technology, hate the new technology, think that it's propelling the sport into the next 100 years, or whether it's just killed the best sport that ever lived on earth. Everyone feels so differently about this, but I think no matter where you sit on that spectrum, at least I hope that we can at least sympathize that some people aren't getting the benefit from these shoes that other people are getting. And I think if we're looking at leveling the playing field, then questions and concerns like that need to be addressed. And, regulations, I think, are good to have in terms of kind of setting a boundary. I think that it's good to have innovation, and we want to encourage companies to continue to innovate. It's part of sport, and it's part of world, and it's part of why records get better, is because we innovate better materials for tracks, and we innovate better materials for shoes, and along with better training programs and things like that. And it's part of what continues to improve our sport. But we want to have changes happen gradually enough that runners aren't at a disadvantage while in this period of limbo while we're figuring the rest out. And so, I think one of the big questions over the last few months was, hey, are shoe companies going to be able to have a shoe to compete with other shoe companies that do have a shoe? And is this going to be fair for all the professional athletes? It was a huge question, but I think the bigger question is, what are we doing for athletes that aren't responding as much to this shoe? And are we going to be able to preserve some sort of level playing field for these athletes without just costing 5 years of their career while we figure out how to make shoes that are going to help a toe striker as much as a heel striker, for example? I don't know what we haven't figured out what aspects of mechanics are being most advantageous with these shoes in terms of helping runners. But it's an important question if we are hoping to keep things level and fair.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion to be had, because carbon fiber plates, they seem to be here to stay. I think when you talk about runners who maybe aren't seeing the same benefits as other runners, I think with the innovation we're talking about, we are going to have to keep innovating, and maybe those runners will find something else that works for them. But it's a tricky situation, because as for you, when you said you didn't know much about this in 2016, when you went on the trials line with some Nike athletes who might have had carbon fiber plate shoes, it's just it's interesting where things are going to move forward in the future. How much farther can we go? How much farther should we go? Because when we talk about this past trials, there were some rules that finally got set because there really weren't any rules. There was that 40 millimeter stack height. Do you think that that rule was like a good rule? Do you think that was more to just kind of ease some people's thoughts on how far a shoe can get pushed? And where do you think the rules are going to go in the future?
Well, it certainly was. The 40 milliliter limit was oddly close to the stack height of a shoe that was coming out shortly after the limit. And so there's maybe some raise for concern there, but I don't think that I really fault if I giving World Athletics the benefit of the doubt. I don't think I really fault how they're setting rules. They want to continue to encourage innovation. But it's tough. 40 millimeters is pretty high. And so that really, I don't know that you could have set a limit that would have affected any shoes much higher than that. Okay. Because at some point we're going to get diminishing returns. I mean, if you have a shoe that's 4 inches high, it's going to be heavy. And so, unless you have some really complex energy return system in it, which they were trying to limit with one plate and things like that, you're going to get diminishing returns with height at some point anyways. And so I don't know that the rule affected a lot of things for the short run. At least I do think that they felt like they needed to get something out there to ease people's minds, and they did that. But I don't know that, it's so tough. Some people would have said, well, why didn't they set a rule, any kind of rule, months ago or years ago? And it's just so tough as a governing body, because if you jump in at every little innovation or every little change and you create a new rule, then you really stifle creativity and growth, and you discourage it. And we want companies to be able to continue to innovate products. And one of the positive externalities of these racing shoes is I think it's going to extend running careers, because we're racing in a cushioned shoe that's causing our body to have to go through less wear and tear for a marathon. I mean, everyone who's wearing new shoes, it seems like all the feedback I'm getting from people wearing new shoes is, oh yeah, I just recover quicker, right? I feel better days after the marathon instead of weeks after the marathon. And so I think these shoes are going to extend my career 2 years, because I'm wearing a more cushioned shoe that's doing less damage to my knee. So there's some good there, right? That's a good thing. Now, if I'm getting an advantage that someone else isn't getting, now that's not a good thing. But if World Athletics is stepping in every time and is limiting creativity and growth and things advancing in the sport, then that stifles it. And so should they have stepped in sooner? Well, in hindsight, maybe, but I'm not going to say that going back, they're going to look forward and say, oh yeah, this is going to become a huge deal and we need to regulate this now. Now they know shoes are making a big difference, and so they're regulating it. Did they regulate it right? I don't know. I mean, you probably get 100 different opinions on that. But it's a tough position that they're in trying to encourage creativity and health and long-term benefits to the sport while preserving the short-term competitive equal opportunity for the current athletes. If we don't regulate anything, probably in 10 years, it self-regulates and it's a level playing field anyways. But athletes right now are hurt. If we regulate every little thing, we hurt the growth of the sport in the long run, but it ensures a level playing field for all the athletes right now. And I think somehow we've got to strike enough of a balance in there that we preserve some sort of equal opportunity while we still encourage these companies to go out there and improve shoes that, like these Endorphin shoes, are going to extend my career.
Yeah, and we talk about the new Endorphin shoes. I think everyone is very excited to get them on their feet. You've got the Pro, which is what you've been racing in. You've got the Speed, which is a little more versatile for those workout days, maybe some daily training. And then you've got the Shift, which is really your highly cushioned daily trainer. How have you implemented those three into your own training, and how excited are you for those shoes to hit the market?
Well, I really love the idea that Saucony had to release a series of them, and I love the idea of a shift. Like, in where are you seeing companies that are putting a lot of this shape technology into a training shoe? And I just feel like you don't see that, and so the shift gives me the opportunity to train in a shoe that's going to put my body in the position that I'm going to be when I'm running in the pro without always being in a plate. And I think, we don't really know what the long-term effects of running in a plated shoe are. And I'm not convinced that doing all of your miles in a plated shoe, or even half of your miles in a plated shoe, is going to be good for your long-term health. Now, racing in them is going to help you race quicker, and it seems like we're recovering faster, but running on a plate requires you to use less muscles in your foot. There's some interesting pressure that's different in your foot. And I'm not sure that we know what that's going to do in the long run. And so I'm not ready to run all my miles in a plated shoe. And I think Saucony releasing the Shift gives me the opportunity to run in a training shoe that prepares me for running in this racing shoe without having to be in the racing shoe all the time. So I love it. And as it goes with my comments on the speed are that, we're not seeing shoe companies putting their premium foam into a tier 2 shoe. And I've said it before, we were talking a little bit about how I think that foam is a bigger portion of the puzzle than the plate is. And so to have our tier B shoe still have premium foam in it is also not something that you're seeing, or that I'm seeing at least, with these other brands. And so kind of gives consumers an opportunity at a couple different price points to, I think, not to pay for a tier B shoe, but not necessarily be getting a shoe that's much lower in terms of performance than the shoe that I'm going to be racing in, and to release a trainer shoe that's going to help your posture and your posture train for performance in a racing shoe. I think it was a really well thought out plan and really well thought out release. And I think the developers and the marketing team at Saucony is really just crushing it right now. They're doing a great job.
Yeah, when I first got the Endorphin Pro on my feet, the first thing you notice is that Power Run PB foam. It's so springy, it's so responsive. And while I was like super stoked to have that shoe, I think I was even more excited for the speed, just because, like you said, the price point, there's no other shoe in that price point that has that ultra, high-end, new age foam in a reasonably priced package. So the speed should be an awesome training shoe. It's the Power Run PB just in general, like you said, is a little more durable. So you put a little bit more stable upper. The plate, it's, I believe, like a TPU instead of a carbon fiber.
Correct.
So, yeah, so it's not going to be quite as aggressive of a shoe. So like you said, I think that's going to be, as much as I think people are going to really love the Pro, the speed is just going to be an amazing addition to your training lineup.
It's really a premium shoe for the price point. I really strongly believe that. And I think, like you mentioned, the foam, this foam is going to last a lot longer than what we're seeing with a lot of these other low density foams. I have these, I'm running in these Endorphin Pros, and I still am running in some of the shoes that are months and months old that I've raced in because the foam's still giving me energy return. And so I do think this is an impressive foam.
Yeah. Now, when we saw you at TRE, we saw a lot of the new Saucony shoes to come out. And when I was talking with people there, everyone was saying Saucony is the company, if we look at the full brand, that they're most excited for in 2020. And I'd agree, like Saucony has really stepped it up. Now, you've talked about the Endorphin Pro and just the whole Endorphin series being awesome. What other shoes are you excited to be coming out, and are shoes that you're using just on a day-to-day basis?
I have loved the modifications that were made to the Triumph 17 that you can get now, and the foam is 25% lighter, but it's still getting great energy return. So the shoe got lighter, good energy return, resilience, and that's my go-to shoe. And I think some of this research that we've done around this foam that's impacting these racing shoes is starting to make it the same type of technology into these training shoes. And so that's my go-to shoe. And the Kinvara is a long time go-to shoe. I mean, anytime I want just a comfy, neutral shoe for maybe a little bit more aggressive of a training day, then that's my go-to shoe. And I think the Kinvara 10 is right on. The ride has done really well lately, and I don't spend a lot of time in the ride, but I'm excited for the new ride to drop this summer, and think that'll be a fun addition to the line, as well as some of what they're doing in the trail running shoes. Saucony has been, it's not something that I've been acutely aware of, and it was just recently that I ordered my first pair of trail running shoes from Saucony, but they've been doing good things in the trail running world. And so excited for this technology to continue to develop and to push that way. And my feedback has been really, really positive for some of their trail shoes. So lots of exciting things going on, and things are being delayed as necessary through this process, and Saucony is doing a really good job at keeping their team intact through this period. And I'm really, really impressed at the leadership. They've had to make cuts in terms of salaries and things like that. They had to make money work, but they're keeping the team intact. And, it's kind of a series of mandatory furloughs for the staff, but they're gonna be January 1, 2021 with the whole team still there intact. And I think it's just such a brilliant management way to keep this momentum that they've had going. And I think you're going to still see impressive innovations through the next few years, even despite this period of setback. So a lot of cool things coming. The team's well situated.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were a little disappointed when they heard the Endorphin series was going to be delayed just slightly, but at the end of the day, they are some awesome shoes, so you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. Luckily, the races seem to be delayed as well, so by the time race season comes back, I think people will have a pair of Endorphin Pros ready to go.
We should still have them to you by your next race, right? So
That's right. Now, when we started this show, the whole point was to bring the community together, running community, and talk running. So we've got some fan questions for you that we reached out to people. The first question, Jared, what were your high school PRs?
So I ran 4:16 for 1600 and 9:05 for a 3200. That one was at sea level. 4:16 was in Utah.
Okay. So we'll count the 4:16 to be a little bit faster, but still very impressive times. Second question, what is your favorite marathon course of all time?
That's tough. The favorite course, now I've had some fun experiences everywhere. I really like the New York course. I feel like it, with the excitement that the bridges bring and the energy and noise that you get when you come down off of Queensboro onto First Avenue and then coming back on Fifth Avenue, the finish in Central Park, to me, it's just it's an iconic course. And I think, you go through the 5 boroughs, there's a lot of checkpoints there, but I think one of the beautiful things about running is that we get to tour these cities that we go and race in, and at road running especially. And I think that tour through New York is a pretty impressive tour. You get to see everything. And so I think for favorite courses, that goes to New York.
Awesome. Now, the final question I have for you, and I think it hits me as well because I might be in a similar situation. What is the most important thing that you'd recommend for an athlete trying to make that jump to the marathon distance?
So I'm going to say consistency. And you hear everyone saying patience. And, 5 years ago, every time someone would say be patient, I hated it. I think, oh, well, yeah, maybe you can be patient. You're super talented, but I need to force this. I need to go work out hard. And I think what I've learned for the marathon is that the more experienced I get, races are 60 or 70% lifetime fitness, and then there is only 30 or 40% that are the fitness that I've brought from this training cycle. And so if you want to become a marathoner and you want to become a marathoner in the long run, being consistent is going to be key. I think we can continue to improve cardiovascularly for a long time. Probably, I don't even know if there's a ceiling to that. Now we start to hit our peak maybe in our 30s or early 40s because our body can't keep up with the pounding. But cardiovascularly, we can continue to improve. And so starting early at making sure that you're putting deposits into your cardiovascular training, base training, being consistent, volume, mileage, tempo, fartlek, that kind of training is going to pay good dividends in the long run.
That's good to hear. I've been consistently running pretty high mileage over the past couple years, hoping to make that transition soon. So it's good to hear that I'm making the right steps in the direction to debut that first marathon.
Well, Connor, I'm going to be watching out for you on the roads then.
Okay, sounds good. I'm excited to get out there, and maybe New York will have a little duel. Well, perfect. Now, for people who want to reach out, see what's going on, what's the latest with Jared Ward, where can they find you?
So I try to be active on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at jwardy21. And my website is jaredward.us, and I put big updates there. Love to engage. So yeah, send me a message.
All right, we'll be sure to slide in the DMs and keep up to date with everything Jared Ward. Well, Jared, thanks for joining us. It's an honor to have you here in person. Well, I guess not in person, but to have
it feels
you,
like it.
It really does. It really does. So thanks again, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.